work today. Today's session is Maximal Markets, Digital Public Infrastructure, Enterprise and Innovation. And I think we really want to focus on the commercial aspects of this conversation today. We've got lots of diverse skills on the panel. Each brings something different to the conversation. And they say it's a good panel is like having a conversation at a bar with your friends. And I'm lucky to call a few of these people my friends already. We're going to keep it quite simple and quite free-flowing and quite high level as well. I want to avoid getting down the AI rabbit hole, which we tend to do quite often. So just by way of introduction, my name is Rona Kopaldas. I am a political economist. I work for a company called Signal Risk and do a few other think tanky, academic, and policy and business intersection type of gigs. And this is something that I find particularly interesting, this digital public infrastructure play, particularly given the rise of the global south, given how important critical minerals, technology, all of this stuff is becoming in the modern world with the fifth industrial revolution as the economy becomes decarbonized, more digital, and more data-driven. So, quick introduction, digital public infrastructure is obviously a catalytic platform for entrepreneurship. By providing open APIs and open source building blocks, DPIs allow businesses to integrate identity, payments, and other foundational services quickly, cheaply, and securely. Startups innovate faster. If done right, they scale more easily, and they bring new digital solutions to markets without the big and heavy infrastructure costs that tend to weigh us down. When it's done well, it expands markets. Small businesses become more visible. Customers get more choice. Competition improves services and prices, but when done badly, it becomes oligopolistic, creates new gatekeepers, and raises the barriers to entry. Obviously, India is the reference case over here, which we are going to spend a lot of time on, but we want to kind of center this conversation around other parts of the global south as well. What are the lessons we can learn both ways with a particular Africa focus as well? So I've kind of honed in on each of your areas of specialization. But before I do that, just rapid fire 30-second introductory round from all of you. Mike, let's start there.
Mike Stopforth, live in Cape Town in South Africa, run a digital marketing business called Second Rodeo, and I'm very passionate about the topics of digital transformation and digital literacy.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm also from South Africa, based in Johannesburg, and I'm in the venture capital industry, so invest in tech startups across the continent. And in my previous life, I spent a bit of time in the world of policy, but I think I'll provide more of a sort of practitioner perspective today. So look forward to the conversation.
Hi everyone, this is Alok Gupta from Ekstep Foundation, a philanthropic organization based in Bangalore, India. I've been part of the transformation journey of India in the last 15 years, starting with Aadhaar. And since then, my focus has been how do you enable non-linear, impact growth using DPI approach. So that's.
Yeah. So hi, my name is Sriram. People call me Sri or Siri, like the secret, the iPhone. Yeah, but I'm a serial and a social entrepreneur originally from India. Missed my connecting flight to Nigeria. Ended up spending a day in Nairobi. And now I live there. It's for 15 years. So Kenya Airways is my first investor into Africa. They gave me a free ticket, or rather a free accommodation. I've been in the digital space for 30 years. I specialize in working with youth and bringing youth into food systems, agriculture, and across the industry, and leverage digital as a means to get there. We're working across 9 countries right now, between Africa and Asia. And I'm the guy with the muddy boots, bringing a practitioner on the ground approach to how DPI and others could be adopted. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I'm Dima Sari. I work for Microsoft. I'm regional government affairs. I've been working with Microsoft for 5 years, focused on digital and AI transformation of the countries in the Middle East and Africa. I was very fortunate to see all the developments that have been happening in the region. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation to see how we can collaborate with.
Great, thanks guys. So Alok, I want to start with you. So we've mentioned India as the base case, the reference case. Digital public infrastructure, the India stack has been extremely successful in India. Can you give us an update as to how this was built, what the successes were, the failures, where we are at the moment, and maybe kind of locate that context to the rest of the global South and Africa?
Sure. Thanks, Ronald. Pretty much the journey started somewhere 2009 with the government of India established UIDI with a problem to solve. How do India basically solve the problem of significant leakages in social benefits, right? India as a country has significant amount of programs, almost 1,000+ programs, which have been initiated by center and different states in terms of different aspects of social benefits. So that was the primary problem with which, UIDI was established. And with that, Aadhaar as a foundational biometric-based identity was created. That triggered the first, what we refer now as on a hindsight is the first impact, because that triggered two things. One is working with the regulator called RBI, the finance regulator, ratifying the eKYC using Aadhaar, right, which basically catapulted the opening of bank account from 20% to 80% in less than 8 years. And there is a established report by BIS, Bank of International Settlement, which actually articulates that the DPI approach helped India to shorten the time from 5 decades to less than a decade. So that was one movement. And at the same time, the telecom regulator did the same thing, ratifying again the eKYC using Aadhaar in the mobile sector. And that again resulted in a significant growth of the mobile penetration. The fundamental piece was by using Aadhaar as a eKYC, you reduce the cost of transaction, which basically made different business models for the private sector to come in and enable these, enable the penetration of banking and the telecom. And that allowed them to not only do on their own, but also allowed them to partner with many ecosystem players to expand their reach. The fundamental key is how do you reduce the cost of transaction, make it as a viable business, to go after the edge cases or go after unviable businesses becoming viable. Now, with that in place, what the second thing, which was the primary goal of Aadhaar setup, was the first, the largest, what we say is government to person payment infrastructure was set up as part of DBT, direct benefit transfer, which basically leveraged, the banking, account penetration as well as the mobile to really go after the problem solving of, leakages. But that was the first use case. What it resulted in, after that was the UPI came. Okay. Now, UPI fundamentally, although it started as a P2P payment, but fundamentally what changed was that it started to penetrate the digital payments to the micro entrepreneur. You have in India, if you see today, QR code being there, even on a hawker, right, to buy, everything is now paid digitally, and that's something happened in 6 years. Started 2017, India was 90% cash. Within 6 years, India actually became the largest digital payment, transactions globally. And that not only made the digital transformation in terms of payments being digital, but I think it fundamentally opened the door for the small, micro and medium businesses to be able to prove their credit worthiness as an alternative source, where the payments through UPI became that alternative source. And when that got combined with what we refer as basically JAM, the bank account opened through Aadhaar, the mobile and the Aadhaar itself, it actually created the next wave where the ability for the MSME, the small micro entrepreneurs, having the access to working capital for the short duration became a viable business, which again got activated by the fintechs, the private sector coming in. And then from there, what India has seen in last, I would say, around 7 odd years, it has now moved from financial inclusion and social benefit leakages being reduced to actually unifying the taxation system across the country, making India as a one unified market, resulted in additional infrastructure being set up for the taxation called GSTN, and also what we refer as FASTag, which is basically allowing the weight at the borders between state to state minimized for the logistics to get streamlined. And again, it is creating a huge, massive movement of formalization of micro businesses, which is again resulting in further growth of overall job
and all.
So that sounds like stuff that we all need in the global south. Is this unique to India, or what are some of the nuances and the features? What can be replicated and what
Yeah,
can't?
so if you look at Rana from a broader perspective, right, the context will vary from country to country, absolutely, right? So you can't just copy paste, shift as is. But I think you have to look at what is DPI approach. DPI approach fundamentally is a design approach which has 4 elements, right? One is you basically enable a set of digital shared capabilities, remove the barrier or reduce the barrier and create a level playing field for your market innovation to come in, right? So market participation to leverage that capabilities to innovate and build many solutions. And then this has to be supported by 2 important aspects. One is you have to have mission mode programs to drive the adoption and creation of those solutions to solve a problem, because problem is the driving force here, right? At the same time, set up institutional setups in terms of policy, in terms of systems in place from a institution perspective, which will establish and support and operationalize this. As a very simple example, when we talk about UPI, one of the biggest thing apart from enabling UPI as a shared capability was a policy innovation, where the financial regulator actually allowed a non-finance tech player to actually partner with banks and create these UPI solutions. And why it is critical? Because the tech player is into the B2C space. If you really want to drive the actual transaction on the ground to be solved, you need to bring those players. Banks typically are not strong in that. So that fundamentally changed the game. And it has resulted in India, around $100 billion market value creation through DPI approach in around 10 to 15 years.
Let's pause there. Fantastic overview. What fascinates me around this is that to get behavioral change amongst pretty much 1 billion people is no easy task, right? So you need to get mass buy-in, and that's something that we're struggling with in Africa with things like the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So I want to come to Sri and talk about the element of trust, because I think what India did really well was that there was political will, there was trust in the institutions and the kind of the guardrails put in place, and that's what enabled this kind of momentum. Do you think that's possible in an African context? And how do we create this trust that's required?
Yeah. Thanks, Ramak. Prima facie answer is no. And where I'm coming from is the context is very important. From our experience working in the remote areas, we have seen that the trust within a family is already broken. People do not trust their own siblings. Forget about government. And you have seen this big Gen Z thing happening in Kenya. I mean, the moment people think DPI, that means they think about it as this is yet another tool given to the people in power to manipulate is the first word that comes to their mind, because that's how they perceive it. So what we have done, I'm speaking from our own experience, we saw the pattern, right? So Africa is a very young continent. Just in Kenya alone, an average Kenyan farmer is 60-year-old and an average Kenyan is 18. The median age of Africa is about 18, 19. So there's a massive intergenerational crisis already hitting there. And nobody trusts anybody. So especially in the rural areas where farmers are alone, and by the way, we had no idea how many farmers are in Kenya. So I kept checking with almost everybody, and everybody said, I think we have 4 million, we have 3 million, we have 6 million. Nobody had an idea. The biggest multinationals had no clue. So everybody were looking at the numbers. The next year, you only just say 30% more next year we'll do, and then they just kept on thinking that way. Until when we said, what if we are able to create a phygital approach to the whole thing? What I meant by phygital is a physical plus a digital. So within the social services, you have this extension services. Like in the agriculture, you have extension officers. In the health, you have extension officers who are supposed to be from government supporting the citizens. That's broken. In agriculture, for every 400 farmers, you are supposed to have 1 extension officer. The reality is 1 for every 4,000 in East Africa. So there's no way the government is able to offer that. So we saw these extreme conditions and said it's a fertile soil for extreme innovation. As a private sector social enterprise, we reimagined by saying, okay, what if we are able to pick up the unemployed rural youth, make them the agents of change, shape them as village level entrepreneurs, build their capacities so in turn they can build the capacities of the local communities. We had to take one sector. Ideally, back of our mind, we want to do it across, but we had to start somewhere to show it. And that started building the trust. And if I just go do a transaction, nobody's going to trust. You've got to give to receive. So we have to start by saying, let's empower these young people so they are able to go in a physical way, use some digital devices in the backpack, offer extension services in a very trusted environment without charging the farmer, who is ultra poor, $3 to $4 per day income. And we do not charge for that. And that's where we have to bring the development actors to underwrite that. Now that we have actually created the trust and we are almost in across the whole country, we got about 20,000 entrepreneurs now. And then the private sector started looking at it and said, oh, now that you have somebody there, I wish to get my products all the way there. Now the private sector started coming in. So where the digital public infrastructure came into play is we asked a very fundamental question, how many farmers do we have? And for that, we had to go create a farmer registry. So that came in as a DPI. So the World Bank supporting the government. So we have 7.2 million farmers now and their families. That makes it almost like 60-70% of the population. That base is now given the line of sight for everybody now to start profiling, now to start seeing who is doing what. And then the whole ecosystem is moving in.
So a couple of observations there. So very clearly you had a bottom-up approach, customized for the country, the context, the situation, right? And very localized. You've kind of highlighted the fact that the existing social contract is also broken, so you needed to build a new one. But that can't be done with technology alone.
I personally believe, no, not possible.
So if we do this comparison between the Indian context and an African context, what do you think the ingredients are to make things work in an African context?
Excellent. So if you look at the payment system, we spoke about identity. We did not take a population approach, we took a sector approach, but we almost reaching the population. Then the payment system is dominated by one private sector, M-Pesa, almost moving 95% of the entire mobile money there. That's an area where I think disruption can happen, provided there's a public will. And that can actually streamline the ONDC kind of a thing, Koshi, that we were speaking earlier, to now start bringing commerce across the sectors. Because now you have a relationship, you got families, rather than thinking sectoral. Now this relationship to the last mile can actually offer bundled services. So if you really look at it, you are actually unbundling at a top level, but you're bundling at a last mile. It's a very completely unique African context and approach that can minimize the cost of transaction, earn the trust, and then can start spinning the 10-ton gorilla flywheel.
Good, very good. Dima, I want to bring you in here. So we've spoken kind of quite high level and macro and technical. We've spoken also about trust. Regulation is the other thing that often comes up. And we know that in an African context, we innovate first, then we regulate because we have to, right? What is the role of regulation in this regard? Because you need trust, as you mentioned, but you don't want to kind of kill the golden goose before it's started. So what do you need to see from your perspective, from a regulatory standpoint, to make a digital public infrastructure at scale work?
Absolutely. No, and I'm glad you built on trust, because I think that's at the core of it, the social contracts and the trust. And I think regulation serves that purpose in particular. How can we leverage regulation to build trust in the technology so that adapters can feel confident that they can share their data, they can share their technology, and they can take away from what feels like their own sovereignty on a personal level to share the data. And I think we were just talking about the AFCFTA. I think cross-border data flow in a protected environment is key, whether it is with the DPIs and with the other providers, so you can leverage the technology, but also particularly within the African context, because I think another problem that we mentioned is in India, you have a harmonized regulatory system, while in Africa, we have sovereign states with their own regulations. So I think we've seen initiative like the AFCFTA and particularly the digital protocol kind of create a momentum where you've seen real collaboration around principle of interoperability. In order for this to work, you need to have an interoperable environment. You cannot build solutions for each country and then try to exchange. So I think that the key challenge would be, how do you take the specificity of every community, of every use case, but yet integrate it into an interoperable system that everybody can trust? I think we've seen that with GDPR, where people started adopting it. Companies like Microsoft started adopting it across the board, and that built access to data. But I think at the same time, we can also over-regulate. So the middle path approach, where you need to create the right level of oversight. So you're protecting against frontier risk, you're making digital safety requirement, you're protecting all of the things that matter really to society, but at the same time, not hindering innovation. And that's what we've seen in other jurisdictions where we rush to regulation, but the innovation is not keeping up. So it's that middle path approach that we're starting to see in countries like Japan, for example, where they took this, where is the risk, where is the remaining risk, and how can we regulate for that, as opposed to just adopting regulation for the sake of it. And I think a key component to think about is that we already have existing laws and regulations. We're not operating in a vacuum. Even AI uses data protection laws, cybersecurity laws, criminal laws still apply, digital safety laws still apply. We're not operating in a vacuum where just because we change the technology, the laws of the country do not apply. So it's about really looking first as a country as, what is my current baseline? Where am I now regulated already? Where is the gap? And how do I do to bridge the gap? That's on one end. And on the other end, it's that balance between sovereignty and cross-border data flow, because none of these solutions would be possible if we don't allow for things like the free trade, like the digital transfer of services. And that requires serious reforms that we need, both between African countries and with the continent and other blocs like India.
And so, thanks for that. The gap, though, between policymakers, private sector players, etc. What are some of the big sources of tension? And what would you like to see from your perspective change?
I think the governments, particularly now in the AI moment, have a very, very big role to play. And it's not only about a laissez-faire approach where you take an approach and you say, okay, we're going to let innovation play. But what we're seeing is the countries where you have the highest adoption are countries where government are actually playing an active role in encouraging adoption. And Microsoft recently released an AI diffusion report. They're releasing it on a 6-month basis, where we track how countries, based on the analysis of Windows devices, are using AI. You have the UAE kind of spearheading the efforts, because there was a concerted effort not only to not hinder innovation, but to invest in skilling of the public sector, digital transformation of the services. So they played a very active role from a policy-making perspective in encouraging adoption. And you see this in the economies that are first digital, like Kenya, like Egypt, like Nigeria, South Africa. So I think it's absolutely about regulation, but I think what we're calling for now in government is that you need to play an active role in encouraging AI diffusion. It's not just about investment or innovation or invention. That's very important. But I think what we need in order for the global digital divide to shrink is to see that adoption and diffusion. And that can only happen with skilling, with giving access to technology, with connectivity, with electricity, which was mentioned on the previous panel, that is very important. So I think we're seeing a combination of the role of the government, not only as a regulator, which is incredibly important, and we need to see that. Cases where it went to the other end of the spectrum is the EU, where they rushed to regulate. At the same time, you need to make sure that you're protecting from disinformation, you're doing content provenance. So that's on the regulation side. But I think where we're seeing tension with governments is saying, if you don't invest now in skilling your population, in updating your digital services, in being part of that digital transformation, the risk of falling behind increases. and how can we encourage governments to play that role is going to be a big part of the conversation.
Excellent, thank you. Some great interventions there, and I'm glad you brought up the topic of adoption, and I want to bring Mike in there. I think, Mike, you're what people would call a digital native.
Yeah, on the cusp, yeah.
So you've got a lot of experience in digital transformation, digital literacy, and using the South African experience, adoption. How do you achieve that? And how do you kind of create the user experience and convince people that they can do this, and it's in their interest to do it?
Yeah, so Ranak, I love thinking about why some emerging digital technology initiatives fail and why some succeed. And obviously we're talking about massive variances in scale, but I used to believe, and seen it through the very narrow lens of corporate businesses and communities adopting new technology and having to overcome muscle memory as being a function of one of two things, or a combination of two things. Can we convince the user that this is necessary and useful? If I can convince you that this tool is necessary and useful, then I've solved 90% of the problems around access, adoption, and scale. The truth is that at the level we're talking about, and with the number of variables in the mix, when we think about the transferability of DPI initiatives at scale, using gold standards as the example, but talking about dramatically different markets and agendas, you need more lenses. And so, because I'm a little OCD, I've been thinking about these lenses through an alliterative through 5 A's, if you like, that I've been thinking about. So the first one is we're all making an assumption, first of all, that there is appetite for an awareness of the need for services at scale like this in all markets at an equal level. And I think identifying first what that appetite is and understanding it, I think, is the first step towards user-centric design. The next one is making sure we have access. And as Lukhona and several of, I think, Ernest made a point on the previous panel as well, access is not just about access to digital platforms. It could be as simple as solving for an electricity deficit, or it could be a literacy issue. And then the peanut butter in the sandwich is adoption in the middle. If we can solve for appetite and we can solve for access, then hopefully we can convince people to use the tools. But there's more to it. There's more to the sandwich. The other part of the sandwich is, well, what about agency and autonomy? Like, provided I'm using the tools, do I feel that I'm protected? Is regulation built into design? Do I have recourse if the system fails me in any way? I think big questions that users are going to ask. And then the biggest one, the trickiest one from an interoperability perspective, from a multi-sectoral perspective, is, can we sustain, can we scale over time due to alignment? Can we solve for the alignment piece? And I think that's the biggest question I have from a transferability. Can we repeat models like this in other markets? Can we solve for the alignment at a stakeholder level? So yeah, those are my OCDAs, but thinking about those as we navigate through the conversation.
Again for
so appetite, access, adoption, then agency, and then finally alignment.
Love it.
Trademark it. That's really cool.
Thanks. Yeah, it helps to alliterate, apparently.
Excellent. So I want to bring in the money guy now. Rajiv, you invest across the continent. In theory, this looks like something that we should be doing, but we know that investing in Africa can be tricky, lots of different markets, fragmentation in the policies, in the political systems, in the currency fluctuations, etc., etc. We know the deal. So I guess the question is, from your perspective, what lens should we be using to kind of understand the investment case for digital public infrastructure? Who needs to invest? Is it the private sector? Is it government? How should we be thinking about this more broadly?
Yeah, thanks. And just to clarify, it's not my money. Just for dinner tonight and lunch and anything in between. I give other people's money away as my job, so I have fun. Yeah, look, it's an interesting question, And the way I think about that in what I do looking at investment opportunities is, Mike's going to love this. The way I think about the world is through various structures and frameworks, often alliteration as well, not in this case though. Actually the first one I think is what we ultimately trying to achieve is what I call the 3D model. And so what I mean by that is, we're talking about DPI today, but really I think we can all agree on one thing. So we have alignment maybe on one thing, is that a digital world serves way more people than the opposite or the converse of that. So if you think about any value chain, whether it's healthcare, finance, logistics, even dating today, right? The concept of digitizing a value chain is step one in making it more efficient for anyone. Step two is you can then decentralize that value chain. So I can remove the middle actors and improve access for people to a particular product or service, which is another way of saying that value chain is just intermediated, which makes it more accessible and affordable and all of the benefits we have. And then the fourth D creates, if it's digitized, we then have data and we can then start to learn and adopt improvements. So if we know that there's 7 million farmers and not 4, we can then use that information, but you need a digital system in order to be able to achieve that, right? So I think we all agree that the process of digitizing a value chain is something that is of paramount importance as a first step in looking at an investment opportunity. So we don't take a sector lens when we look at, we're funded by a listed financial services company called Old Mutual. So many people think that we focus on fintech or insurtech. The reason we don't, and one of the reasons that our mandate resonates a lot with me, is because I hate thinking through sectoral lenses. I sit at conferences very often and the question from a moderator or from the audience is, oh, what are the interesting themes right now? What do we need to be investing in? And I hate looking through sectoral lenses. And so the framework that I thought would be useful to sort of encapsulate what is needed for this process of digitization, decentralization, disintermediation is what I call the EMC model. And what I mean by that is, in order to achieve that 3D outcome that we all want and probably do align on, you need 3 things to happen. One is the enabling infrastructure. So what I mean by enabling infrastructure is threefold. It's physical. I mean, there's no point in talking about DPI in Africa if less than half the population don't have the internet or electricity. What's the point, right? So you need physical infrastructure. You then obviously need digital infrastructure. The data centers, the protocols, and various enabling digital infrastructure in order for this to work. And then the third part of that is the human infrastructure, the human capital. So we've spoken about literacy, we've spoken about what we need to kind of make DPI work. So that's the enabling. Then you have the macro, and I think this is probably something that people don't necessarily consider as much. So if I'm going to go build out data centers in Africa, I need to look at, through my investment lens, I need to look at the cost benefit. And if I'm sitting in a macro environment where I can lend as a lender, because most of that is financed through debt, right? If I'm a lender and my alternative is lending to the Kenyan government or the South African government, and I get a 15% return on that, why am I funding something that is a lot more risky? So you have to you have to be in a macro environment that is conducive to the investment in DPI, which the reality is most of our economies are just not today, right? And so we have to kind of think of the macro. Another factor associated with the macro is tax benefits, for example. How does a region like this manage to attract investment, human capital? It's through certain regulatory concessions, incentives, which we don't often consider, and that's sort of included in the M. And then the third is, I think, equally understated, and that's the cultural environment. So one of the things we spoke about, and by the way, if we can be provocative or disagree, you mentioned, Ronak, that in Africa, you have to innovate first and then regulate. I think that's true across the world. I don't think that's an African problem. And I think that's absolutely fine. You want to innovate and then figure out how to regulate. But what I think we don't spend enough time on is the culture that we're creating and the way in which we're doing that. So I'll give you an example from Kenya. I used to live in Kenya. When I was working there at the World Bank, I was sort of sitting between public sector and private sector. And the minister of ICT at the time was a guy by the name of Joseph Mucheru. Some of you probably know, right? So he spent many, many years leading Google. I think he was the first employee in Africa for Google, right? He's an investor in tech startups. He understood blockchain before blockchain was a thing. So when you have regulators and a culture of regulating that is private sector led and regulation implemented, that makes a huge difference. And the lag between regulation and innovation is minimized. But I think regulation is always going to follow innovation, and that's completely fine. And I think sort of to kind of summarize that, the culture is, we have a lot of these discussions through a very theoretical lens where we say, if you do this, then this, then this. The reality, especially in this world of AI, is that we are human beings. We have biases. We think through a certain part of our brain that is not statistical, it's emotional. And we need to understand that the way people make decisions and get things done is through the emotive side of our brain, not the statistical. So, Warren Buffett's partner, Charlie Munger, who many of you might know, he's got this famous quote, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome." So if we want to achieve mass incentive and adoption of, this digital world through DPI, we need to think about what naturally incentivizes a human being to make a decision. Often it's not what the Excel spreadsheet says, or the policy paper, or the McKinsey report. No offense to McKinsey if there's anyone in the room. And so, that's kind of the way we think about things. And personally, through an investment lens, is what drives the human incentive rather than what drives the financial model or the policy.
Okay, brilliant. So this is a common theme that's been running through all the interventions, the topic of incentives, right? So let's be practical, like you said, and we come to your investment committee and we want to make an investment in Kenya, hypothetically, in digital public infrastructure. Now, there are all these issues that you mentioned, etc. What would convince you? What is the thing that you need to see with your investment committee member hat on to allow you to undertake an investment like this?
Most of the time it comes down to what is the unfair advantage that you possess that someone else doesn't. And that could be something as pragmatic. I'm not saying this is the diplomatic answer, but the pragmatic is I have access to XYZ. XYZ could be capital that others don't, people that others don't, or processes or IP. So in my world of venture capital, we look at IP as something that's defensible and something that I can invest in. The other things are not necessarily IP, but they're unique to me as an individual. I have access to Mike, who has access to someone else who's going to give me an unfair advantage. And that's just the reality. Because today, we're very fortunate to live in a world where the internet has kind of democratized access to pretty much everything. And I know we hear that word democratized in every context, but it's great, right? I don't need to go sit in a Harvard class anymore. I can learn everything today sitting in Joburg or in Nairobi or wherever. So we have access to information. So it's leveled the playing fields. So what are the things that are going to give me the idiosyncratic competitive advantage over the next person? And to me, that's the key driver.
Excellent. So I want to kind of do another kind of round with the panel, quick interventions. But I think let's be practical here. Winners and losers, right? Which countries are winners? I know you don't like this question, but which sectors? How do we kind of factor in what's happening globally between China and the US and the AI arms race? Is this kind of something that can be used as an alternative or a cushion, or do we have to pick sides? how do we go, Dima, from being rule takers to rule makers in the global south? There are all these big moving parts in the world. So just opening it up and throwing out some provocations, and maybe Alok will come back to you to start.
So before I answer that question, just to connect two dots. See, one of the things what we saw worked in India, and also except work in India, and we are working in some of the countries in Africa and Brazil also, is if you ground your initiative in the problem, then your chances of success are much higher. But if you ground it in technology, the chances are very, very low. And we have seen initiatives in India which were technology first versus problem first, and the difference is very, very different. It gets stuck. And a lot of times DPI somehow creates the impression it's a technology-driven initiative, which is not the case. So that is one. So problem-driven, and you have to be very focused on adoption. I think the point which you were highlighting part, right? And the adoption, what we have seen is if you drive the solution which is grounded in the existing behaviors. So the classical enterprise approach does not work when you talk about population scale, because in an enterprise you can shift the behavior because you have a defined set of people. By the way, that also doesn't work in private.
Yeah, I was going to say it doesn't work there either.
I was going to say.
Example of CRM being a massive failure across enterprises. So the key is you ground your solution in the current existing behavior, so that the adoption is natural, it is easier for the people. And if it is solving my problem, I will adopt. You don't have to convince me, right? So those are elements which are very critical. And one of the pieces which sometimes get lost is the market economics. If you do not focus on market economics for the private sector, they will not just come for the sake of doing good. The market economics is a critical element when you're enabling it through a DPI approach. So you have to keep in mind. I think trust is a tricky question. I think there are some fundamental, basic setup have to be done, have to be there in terms of political backing, certain trust in the community to the government. But
do you think you can do this without political backing?
So I would say largely no, because if at minimum government has to play an enabler role. They may not be running, operating anything, but as an enabler, it's an important role government has to do if you have a societal impact, right? So that basic trust has to be there. If you do not trust your financial regulator, you have a serious problem, right? At minimum. But I think one of the elements of trust also comes from two things. How do you show value on the ground in a quick time period? You have to ground your execution, demonstrating value as early as in your curve before you scale. Because trust is also a manifestation of experiencing the value rather than just theoretically discussing about it. So that's a very critical element of that. The second piece, which I think Shriram highlighted, DPI does not mean the interfaces with the user is all digital. I think, you enable the infrastructure, which is digital in nature, to reduce the barrier. But the interfaces with the user, based on the situation, can be human, right? And it will evolve over a period of time as the society evolves. So it does not have to be a digital interface. It depends on the context and the situation. Because sometimes the trust also comes from there. Like I think the point Shriram was making, that if in a local community, for example in India, if you go to villages, people will trust certain people in terms of advice. They will not engage with the technology, or they don't want to engage, or they don't know how to engage with the technology, right? So how do you empower that local trusted, if I use the word guide, through technology, through a DPI approach, through infrastructure, through the market innovation, who may in turn help the community? And it can evolve over period. I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. In India, education, when we enabled the education solution, it was download first, because the video, the data was very expensive. And as the evolution of data became, faster and become cheaper, the solution shift to running live stream first. So this is a very simple example
right.
of how to do that. I think coming to the AI, I mean the way.
Sorry, before you get to that, can I just ask you one question around what's the one piece of advice you'd give to policymakers in Africa who are trying to replicate what India's done?
Find your problem first. You have to find what is that one problem you want to solve. Like I said, India did not create Aadhaar to give identity. That would have been a massive failure. And there were many examples before India did as massive failures which told, why are you doing evil, you fail. The shift was we were solving for the social benefit leakage. And to do that, by the way, Aadhaar was only one shared capability. There were many others which were set up. So find the problem which will impact the majority of people. Spend enough time to figure out your problem clearly, because a lot of times spend a lot of time in technology. But the biggest problem is, have you understood your problem well? Have you understood the context of the problem well? Technology is the easiest part.
Can I pause you there, and we'll do another round on AI with all of you. Mike, you wanted to say something, then we'll come to Sriram.
Yeah, I just think Alok has pointed out an element of wisdom here that is so critical for us to understand. We see it happening in a microcosmic scale where there's an assumption that we make that technology, and especially emerging digital technology, is an antibiotic, not an amplifier. It's going to magically solve system errors for us. It's going to be a silver bullet that's going to correct operational problems or people problems. And the reality is that it tends to exacerbate failures of existing systems rather than automatically solve them. And there's a tension in that, because Alok's earlier point around the conversation around the transferability of DPI is not about transferring a technology stack. It's transferring principles. It's ideals. It's a belief system almost more than anything else, rooted in political will. Is that if we're assuming, or let's say even we get it right and it works at scale, there are existing system deficiencies that it might exacerbate. And one of those is inclusion, and one of those is equality. And that's a massive issue, because those two principles work against each other. One of the inherent principles of successful DPI or DPI adjacent initiatives is inclusion. Has to be there, has to be baked in. But if we're just popping technology on top of existing systems that are already unequal by nature, it's going to amplify that inequality. It's going to push those. And that's just your earlier point around winners and losers. That's a winner and loser equation that I think is very important for us to talk about.
And I think, Sriram, you had similar thoughts around the gulf and the inequality expanding and a winner takes all type of approach, and how that could actually make things worse.
Yeah, so just building on what Alok said, the incentives are never aligned. Governments are operating on a typical 4-year cycle. A new president comes, 4-year, new narrative, they go, somebody comes. Large private sector companies are operating on a quarterly cycle. What's my P&L? Am I making money? Not. A farmer and the rural economies are operating on almost a day-to-day cycle, because it's like basics. Their incentives are never aligned. So
can we align them, or?
Answer is
not?
yes, we can. And that's where the market economic model, I'm just borrowing what he said and learning from what Koshi, he did a masterclass to me on the bus today. Yeah, because it clarified a lot of things, right? So the discoverability is the most important piece. The way we have kind of framed the narrative is we took an ecosystem approach. The way I speak to the politicians is very different. If I'm speaking to the presidential office, we're talking food security, jobs for the youth. The unfair advantage we have here is that you kind of made it a political narrative. While we are speaking to public sector, we are saying, hey, do you know where to sell your products and services? I'll give you the discoverable market for you. While you're speaking to the rural entrepreneurs, we're telling them, here is a livelihood for you, here is how the access for credit and access for market. For all of this, as we are going round and round and trying to figure it out, is where we figured out there's a protocol that already India has built called the Beacon Protocol, which helped me to kind of make the discoverability, ordering, fulfillment, and post-fulfillment across the the commerce network. All we had to do was to jump on that, put that in, and all of a sudden the principles of DPI, the philosophy, rather than preaching, we actually started doing. And we started communicating pain and failure stories. Everybody thought this is a failure story. No investor wanted to touch us because where is the money? Screw the farmer, make money on commodity. I said, no, we wanted to do it this way. But as we started doing this, the new presidential team came, they found us everywhere in the country. All they did is copy-pasted, and that's now the national mandate. Fine. It's not my mandate, it's his mandate. And he went out and said, we had about 4,000 entrepreneurs. He said, the president says, big announcement that we want 20,000 entrepreneurs serving 7 million farmers. Great, it's your initiative. But it is still anchored and based on the fundamental principles.
And what's the one piece of advice you'd give African policymakers?
Is stay away.
Stay away.
In a way that, the more they get involved. So the key learning lesson I got is not to work for the government, work with the government. You do the hard work. You need an enterprise or a social entrepreneur or enterprise who has to do all the dirty work. Nobody has the patience to do all of this. But everybody is willing to own the success story.
Excellent. Dima, I saw you nodding away both at Sriram and at Mike. So let's bring you in here.
Yeah, no, I really like the point about the problems. And I think when we're thinking about adoption of technology and AI, the conversation has to be focused on outcome and not necessarily just on the innovation. Because what we see in reality is that you can have the most innovative technology solution, but it's not solving real life problems which affect adoption, as we have talked. So the conversation, in order to identify those problems, need to shift from the tech ecosystem, the whole tech stack supply chain, into other industries and sectors who can help identify what are the problems that need solving for. I'll take power as an example and electricity. How would AI enable more efficiency in providing power that would expand actually access to power? That's not necessarily just have the power in order that I access AI and then I can work in digital, but rather how are the power and energy companies leveraging AI to expand their reach? And I think identifying their problems and focusing on the outcomes and moving the conversation from the usual suspects who talk about digital transformation and AI to similar to this conversation where we're thinking farmers, we're thinking citizens, where we're thinking expanding, that would be what allows you to have the social permission to continue investing in that sector, whether it's DPI or AI or any of that, because you need that identifying what is the problem, and the only way to identify it is shift the conversation from a pure technology or government policy conversation to actually where the problem is. Health, like for example, the work of AI in detecting new, for example, patterns of genetic changes that would help predict potential issues in the future. You could not have done this and analyze these genetic data without AI, and it's helping to solve a real problem. That's a conversation for the medical sector that needs to happen. And I think that shift would be incredibly enlightening for us to be able to continue focusing on the outcomes, which is a key problem to have.
And what I think you're saying is that we need to rebuild social contracts. That requires a lot of hard work and long-term thinking and thinking differently.
I mean, the social contract is there. It's actually going back, I love the 5 A's, to the alignment. How do you align yourself to that social contract? How do you align yourself to the conversations that are happening already? KYC, for example. That's a great example. Everybody wants to be bankable. Everybody wants to have access to financial services. They get locked at KYC because maybe they can't bring in the document, or there used to be example of how long it would take you to travel to get your ID from a different country, and you can't be bankable without it, and it could take you for one of our colleagues used to share a story about an uncle of his who passed away, unfortunately, on his way once to go get an ID. It's a exaggerated example, but it shows the importance of automating those basic services in order to solve a problem. And I think these real life examples really bring technology and the role it can play to life. And that's where the shift in conversation needs to happen.
It's a nice nuance there. And your one piece of advice to policymakers?
I like what you said, is political backing important? I think it's important, but it's not sufficient. And so how can the political power accompany that journey that takes you beyond the 4 years and beyond that? You need the political backing. You need the governments to really invest in a long-term view of where they want to take the community so that you're not left behind. Skilling is a basic way of thinking about it. You have, through your education system, this ability to scale. Today, digital literacy and AI skilling across the board languages and all of that, the immense power that that have on a country is just tremendous. You can see the difference between communities based on how much skilling they're getting. And I think any country today that is not looking at skilling might be already being left behind versus another country, neighboring country that is invested in.
So that speaks to vision, right? I guess.
Exactly. And I think you need that national plan. You need that vision. You need that beyond just the political backing initially for a certain project.
Okay. So solve one problem, stay away, bank a vision, right? Mike, I forgot to ask you your quick one piece of advice before we get to Rajiv.
Going to steal from a lot. Principles over practicalities, I think.
Nice. Rajiv, before we open up to the floor, your take.
The advice to politicians. How much time do we have? It's a really tough one because on the one hand, it's so easy to be dismissive of politicians and go, oh, they suck at this and they suck at that. Until you put yourself in a position of empathizing with
Them.
trying to regulate and coordinate an entire nation. It's actually pretty hard, right? I see some nodding there. And so I have a lot of empathy for people who are in a position to do that. On the one hand, I would say, the biggest issue that most of our governments have under a democratic governance system is short-termism. So I think someone alluded to this just now. I'm not prioritizing what's in the best interest of Rajiv. I'm prioritizing how to get re-elected in 4 years. And the decisions I make are aligned with that. And therefore, we have this culture of short-termism, which is, to me, a root cause of many, many issues that we have in the world, right? So I would say try and avoid that. The reality is, if you're going to operate under a system of democracy the way we have in many countries, you just don't have that luxury. So it's a waste of time. So what I will say is kind of aligned to, picking your problem. It's understanding the fact that you're just not going to be everything to everyone in a country because most of our countries are so diverse. So what are the ways of being smart around demonstrating short-term wins that resonate with the highest proportion of people? So sort of that 20-80 Pareto principle. So how do I focus, 20% of my efforts and maybe resonate with 80% of the population? Being market friendly, minimizing that lag between innovation and regulation that we were talking about earlier. And going back to what I said earlier, which is what fundamentally drives the perception of your efficacy is the way we think as human beings. So you might be doing a million things right behind the scenes, and they're actually good policies in the long run. But the thing that people are going to talk about the most are the things that affect the majority of people, which can often be superficial. So demonstrate some short wins, be pragmatic about it, and use that goodwill to then do the long-term infrastructure things that you wanted to do in the first place.
So I'm hearing a piece which is EQ over IQ, and then be pragmatic.
Yeah.
I just want to add very quick 2 points. I actually echo, right? I think the job of a government is very tough, right? So, and there are practical limitations, right? So I think we need to be cognizant and respect that. Being part of UID for 3 years, I saw a different lens. But I think the other point which you made, right, about the democratic challenge. By the way, India had the same problem, right? And I will not go into the details. There's a conversation offline. But how do you focus on value demonstration and reach the initiative point of no return? Because when the political government changes, this is a common challenge, right? Which you highlighted, right?
Great point.
But you need to strategically focus to deliver so that it can survive the political change. And we have seen that in India also.
Brilliant. So I think we've got like 5 minutes for questions. Guys, if you can keep your questions brief, questions, not comments, please. We'll try to get through as many as we can.
I'll go first. Yeah. So the opportunity is massive. India is already on that path. We are already seeing use of, as a simple example, use of AI in UPI, where feature phone can be your way to engage,
through speaking and still do the payment. As a very simple example, what we are looking at is the language AI has a huge potential because it can literally change how you interface with the technology. Like I said, shift and ground your solutions into what is natural to human. The moment you can enable voice AI, the interface with technology will go fundamentally, which is most natural to every human being, irrespective of their digital literacy, irrespective of their language literacy. And you can actually enable interface in my own language. I don't need to know that common English or local language, right? So that's a fundamental transformational shift, right? But at the other level, there are three things we are looking AI to manifest. I think that's an opportunity for every country to look at. Remove the interface friction, make technology work for everyone, literally everyone. Okay. Number two, enable intelligence, predictive intelligence. The human capacity is limited to handle data and to handle, culling out insights. Number three, enable personalized guidance. India at least 1.5 billion. We are hampered in many sectors. Our inability to provide human guide or human capacity in every sector, this can fundamentally shift the game.
And I want to comment on the cybersecurity piece. I think that's a key component of what we're talking about today, going back to the trust. I think cybersecurity, AI has presented both an opportunity to analyze predictive intelligence and to analyze more signals so you're able to predict any cybersecurity breaches, but it also increased the ability of hackers and other players to infiltrate into system. And I think players like Microsoft, we have dedicated teams that are looking constantly around 8 billion signals per day to try to determine where could the next wave come from and to inform governments. So each year we publish a report where we tell governments how much attacks did they get, where did they get it from, and how can they build their infrastructure or their system in a way that protects from cybersecurity. And I know we talked about the use of platform and accessibility of platform and regulation, but we're seeing a lot of appetite from African government across agencies. So it could be the MCIT, but it could be also the defense industry or the cybersecurity agencies who are interested in investing in cybersecurity because they realize that a big aspect of sovereignty is not just what you contract with, but your ability to protect these ecosystems that you're putting together. And I think we cannot have the AI conversation without thinking about cybersecurity and what kind of critical training, skilling, and technology you need to really integrate cybersecurity into the equation. I know there are law enforcement, so I'm sure you would also echo that. But I think thanks for bringing this out because it's a very important part of the conversation.
Excellent. Do you want to take the second question, either of you guys? Anything to add?
I think she's covered. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, surprised it's taken us this long in the day to get to something like cybersecurity, because it's like having a nuclear conversation without talking about the safety associated with nuclear technology, right? Like you can't. The reality is, human beings will always look for loopholes to benefit, right? The industries that have been the most innovative historically are the sin industries, right? When you look at new technology as it comes out, like cryptocurrency, for example, which group of people have been the biggest adopters of that? And trying to find loopholes and all of that is just a part of humanity. And so it is a fundamental part of digitizing, or AI, if you want to talk about that, or crypto, is how do you put in place the right guardrails that have this delicate balance, right, between innovation and trying to ensure that you're protecting people's interests and government's interests.
Yeah, let's just quickly see, security is a never-ending game. I worked in the software security for 6 years, and this is a given. It's a chasing game. It never ends, right? I think what is critical is to make cybersecurity effective. Collaboration is extremely critical. If any organization or any country wants to do alone, it will not happen.
Who wants to take
Yeah, so we can have a longer conversation, but to keep it short, today we talk about India and what we have achieved. I just want to remind you that journey in a broad way started with Y2K, 2000. 25 years is not that long in the history of a nation, right? So yes, I think in the earlier panel, there was a point made that India invested in the talent. Absolutely, that was a very important point highlighted. But the talent realizing value did not happen till Y2K. Enabling that first experience of the talent to manifest into something, even with the Y2K is where we started and started building trust, is the journey. So my limited point is start your journey where you are. Don't worry about where others are. Number one. Number two, I think the point you made is very critical. You have to build the local talent and the local private sector capacity. I agree, but businesses. See, fundamentally what India has realized is that government role is to enable, businesses create growth, businesses create jobs, not government. And DPI as a design approach fundamentally works on that foundation. In fact, if you look at total factor productivity, which is one of the measures economists use to differentiate between why a developed nation is a developed nation and why the other nations are not. The fundamental growth factors which TFP talks about are actually foundational aspects of DPI approach. So in many ways, DPI as a design approach is a mechanism to enable that TFP growth as a nation for higher prosperity. That's a fundamental piece which India has realized. And there are ample data points I can share with you which reflects that.
But just one single point, if you allow me. I mentioned the 25 years because I was in the e-government foundation team at 2001. And then I became an ambassador for UN for communication technology and journalism for women in 2003. But I mean, the challenges which we were facing as a communication manager at that point, still the same 2026 in the whole digital transformation. That's my point. The legal
Yes.
play, the compatibility, the trust, the psychology of the people, all these things.
Can I address the startup of thing, right? So let me just give some practical example. In Kenya, the World Bank has given loan for 2 major programs, about $650 million. And the loan adoption, what is it called? The country could not consume the loan. There is a word in this, in finance word, it's called
Unutilized funds.
Yeah, something like that. They could not because the country was not ready to absorb. The absorption problem, that's the word I was saying. No, they could not absorb the loan given.
Yeah.
But there's one thing they've done is, between the 2 programs, they've grouped the farmers into self-help groups like in India, similar thing. And the groups are existing. Between both of them, there were about 1.2 million farmers. So we sat down with the World Bank team and they said, we did not ask them for money. They said, you have the groups. The cost of profiling one farmer is $30. The cost of serving them is $10 per interaction. And no one has that money. We said, why don't you bring these 1 million farmers together? Let's create a village level entrepreneurs. And now all the startups who have a solution to offer to them, let them leverage that platform to reach to them. The reaching and the serving of came down to $1 per farmer. Now, how did they benefit? Everybody benefited here, right? So the public good was deployed to do the enablement. The private sector, including the startups who have great innovations, AI, BI, all of them, they could reach the farmer, validate, and then constantly improvise. And that's like the beginning of the journey of a country. And the second thing I wanted to share is it's good to fail quickly. And we set the expectation to the government that we are going to fail, but we are going to learn, and we are going to quickly iterate and do it. And that then became a policy. So
Very good. So just to wrap up now, moderator's prerogative, final question. I need one reason for optimism around digital public infrastructure from each of you. Why should we be optimistic? Mike?
I think the first step is there. There absolutely is an appetite. There's no doubt whatsoever. So we're at least a fifth of the way through the journey.
Great. Dima?
I would say that it's not a potential solution, it's the only solution. That collaboration and the use of existing platform is the only solution we have to resolving some of the problems we have. So
Yeah, so DPI makes markets bigger and fairer at the same time, and it lowers the cost of trust.
Very good. Hello.
DPI approach and AI combined provides nations to, go towards prosperity in a new world of digital economy, which is given. You can't stop that anymore. And there is enough experience, lived experience across the globe, and at least from an India-Africa perspective, how do we collaborate so that the region doesn't have to go through the same experience of 25 years which India has done.
Excellent. Rajiv, final word.
It may sound like a broken record, but it doesn't lie in the policy or the spreadsheets or whatnot. There's no rational answer to this other than to ask yourself, or to answer this simple question for yourselves. We all find ourselves here on a Tuesday in Dubai. Are our lives better because we have access to digital infrastructure or not? So the very simple question is, what world do you want to live in? And that's the answer for me. Is it a net positive? Of course, there's negatives and risks, but are our lives significantly and exponentially better as a result of it? And do we want to see more of that? For me, the answer is pretty simple.
Excellent. On that note, can we give our panelists a round of applause?
So first of all, I wanted to thank all of our speakers, all the participants, our colleagues and attendees who sort of made time out of their busy schedules to fly into Dubai and make this event such a success. I think I can say on behalf of everyone that we received some very precious kernels of information from both sessions on the intersection of AI and DPI, as well as the role that DPI is playing in emerging markets in the global south. If I were to sort of like sum up both the sort of segments combined, what I pretty much extracted three sort of principles that connect all the talking points. The first is accessibility, the second is interoperability, and the third is trust. In fact, I was quite surprised how in a very tech-heavy sort of event, one of the things that all these speakers from 8 different countries reiterated upon again and again was the central role of the human experience. Whether it be about alignment, whether it be about building trust, or whether it be about last mile adoption. I think one of the speakers mentioned unbundling at the top and then bundling at the bottom. How can we sort of use the sort of familial relationships that we see in a lot of global south societies as a lever to encourage digital adoption, digitization of the entire value chain and this DPI infrastructure that we spoke about. Another sort of issue that we covered very broadly was interoperability. And this was sort of one of my favorite parts of the discussion, especially in the first leg. There was a bit of back and forth between the speakers on how to make sure that what we want is to digitize the entire economy. Obviously, that means that institutions, private institutions and public institutions will have access to sensitive user data. And who then becomes accountable? I think one of the audience members raised a very important point of if anything goes wrong, who will ultimately be accountable? And I think that is a thought that we can all leave this event like thinking about. I don't think we had reached a conclusion in the discussion, but I don't think questions like these can be answered in 1 or 2 roundtable discussions. And so I hope that this is just first in many roundtables on these important topics that we will have. And I hope now that this is a pre-event for the AI Impact Summit, that we will have more and bigger platforms where we can discuss such enormous and complicated topics that will sort of determine the trajectory of our digital future. So once again, on behalf of ORF Middle East, I would like to thank everyone.